Ah, look at it, magic. I think I'm live now. If nobody tells me anything, I will assume that I am live. Nothing works from the first attempt, right? I hope you see my screen. I think you don't. So let me share my screen. Here we go. Technical difficulties. There we go. I think I'm live now. Thank you all. Let's talk about developer platforms, right? And developer platforms is something that companies have been building for years, decades, long time. But before we get to developer platforms, first of all, I have no slides, or maybe only a few slides. This is a brainstorming session more than anything. You will see my artistic needs, capabilities right away, right? So what we've been doing for years or even decades is that we've been building stuff, right? We've been writing scripts that do something. We've been writing some infrastructure as code stuff. We've been defining applications, apps. Sometimes they might be containers, and so on and so forth, right? So our systems consist of a lot of different moving pieces, and no human, especially in bigger system, can understand how all that works, can learn how to operate all that, and so on and so forth, right? And that's where developer platforms come in. And that's where people misunderstand what the developer platform is, right? For many, the first reaction usually with people is, okay, this is madness, right? No person can understand how to do all this, whatever that is. So what am I going to do? I'm going to, or we are going to do, we're going to build a platform. And what is going to be a platform? A platform is going to be a user interface. We're going to build a user interface, let's say web UI, it could be something else. And that user interface is going to be how people interact with the system, right? So people go to user interface, and then user interface is going to go to all those things and do all that stuff, and so on and so forth, right? And that fails. That fails for the same reason why it failed without user interface, simply because it is too complex. And if we ask any web developer right now, at least any experienced web developer, that web developer would tell you, no, this is silly. We don't do this, right? We don't make user interfaces complex. We do something completely different. And that something completely different is relatively straightforward, right? You have your system. And in this context, I don't care what that system does, right? It could be shell scripts. It could be Python scripts. It could be Terraform. It could be Pulumi. It could be Crossplane. It could be anything you want. I don't care in the context of this story. What I do care is that that system has some services. So let's put it like this. We have a service that does something like, hey, this is a service that will manage a database, right? This is a database. And then we have another service for application, let's say backend application. And we have another service that will give people clusters, right? And so on and so forth. We have services. Now, this is similar to what we were doing before. The major difference is that all those expose an API, right? API. That's the key that's the key part there, right? That's if you're using AWS, how is AWS exposing its services to you? Through an API. If you're using Azure, how is Azure exposing services to you? Through API. Everything that makes sense and written in the last 10 years or more has an API, specifically HTTP API, most likely, right? And that makes things very much easier, because from there on, users do not need to care much about what is this, how does this work, and so on and so forth. Users will be sending requests to API, right? And say, I want, I don't know, database. Excellent. API will make sure that the right thing is created, orchestrated, updated. We don't care about those things anymore from the user perspective. I just know that I need to send a request to the API and I will get something, right? Whatever I'm requesting, whatever API allows me to do. Now, the problem with that part is that not many people like using CURL, right? CURL, and then you create HTTP request and send it to an API. That's just complicated. That's horrible, right? And that's where we are coming now to the subject of today's talk, right? How do we build not platforms? Maybe I will talk about how to build a platform, but how do we build a user interface or console for developer platforms, right? So we need to figure out how to build a user interface, and that user interface, instead of people sending URL requests, they will talk to that user interface. User interface talks to the API, and user interface knows nothing about anything except I know how to communicate to an API to ask, request something, or to that requesting something can be, hey, I want to manage this resource, or I want to observe this resource, I want the state of this, whatever the requests are. And that UI can have many forms, right? It can be CLI. It can be web UI. I don't know how to write today, right? It could be VS Code, and so on and so forth. Now, the key here, the thing that makes me very excited today, mostly because of what Port recently released, and what makes all the difference is that in the past, we would still have to program those UIs to create forms and fields and triggers and bunch of things, right? We would need to define data models, we would need to define actions, and so on and so forth. And that's very, very, very silly for a simple reason, because all those things are already exposed through an API, right? This guy here already has schemas of everything we can do, right, in the system. The API has schema, UI can, or CLI, or web UI, or VS Code plugin, doesn't matter what it is, can go there and say, tell me what I can do, and it gets a list of something, and then it can go back and say, give me the schema of this something. Give me the schema of all the fields, all the properties that people need to manage, let's say, a database or anything else. And that brings me to a more practical part of this story, where I will show you Port to begin with, and then we're going to switch to other stuff. And right now in Port, right, I have nothing. This is a Virgin account, right? It has catalog is completely empty, self-service is completely empty, and builder, which has data model. There are no data models, right? So Port has no idea what to do right now. Now I have two options here, right? I can create a data model myself. I can import something from GitHub, from this and that. I can start creating forms and fields. I can write JSON and stuff like that. But I'm not going to do any of those things, simply because everything that a console, a front end of my platform needs is already available through an API. So instead, what I'm going to say, hey, look, I have zero patience for you today. I'm not going to waste my time trying to define all the things. I'm going to do this. I'm going to tell you, hey, go to my Kubernetes cluster, use this filter to, first of all, go to my Kubernetes cluster and discover what you can do. You discover it. Don't ask me questions. Everything is over there, right? Available for you. Discover it yourself. But since my cluster might have more things than what developers need, I'm going to limit it to, in this case, only namespace things and only composite resource definitions. We're going to get to what it is, right? But this is just a filter. The point here is that I can tell it, go to the API, in this case of Kubernetes, because that's the only reasonable place we can build APIs today. Go there and find out what people can do, right? Don't ask me questions, discover it. And if I go back to the pages I showed you, where is it? There we go. Let's put this so that you see it well. Excellent. So if you go back to the builder, to the data model, now, if this is working, it will soon, I think every minute or so, it will discover everything I have in my cluster. That will happen in a second, but since I'm an impatient person, I'm going to double check it. Kubectl Nessus Port logs. Let's see whether it's working today. Maybe it's not working. Then this will be a very embarrassing demo. Yeah, you will see every 60 seconds it is polling. Yeah, there we go. Look at this. I'm going to refresh the screen. Not yet. Come on. There we go, right? Now, Port discovered, instead of me defining all the data models and stuff like that, it discovered that there are 3 different types of things people can do, right? It can create something called cluster claim. Doesn't matter what it is, right? I mean, from the port perspective, from the UI perspective, it can create applications and it can create databases. And it found out the services, right? Let me make this smaller. Hey, you can create something called app claim. You can create a cluster. You can create the database. You can update those things and you can delete those things, right? So it auto-discovered everything that I would need to expose to everybody in my company, to all the developers. Now, sometimes this is great out of the box. Sometimes it might not be great. And sometimes we might want to tweak the outcome of the discovery, right? But even if you don't get there 100%, we might be able to get there 90%, right? Completely auto-magically. So those are all the fields that we discovered, and I can now tweak it and say, you know what? This is all great, but this thing that is called composition ref name, I would like to enable it, even though you disabled it by default. And I will say save. And let me make a few other tweaks just to show you that we can now tweak the outcomes of that. So let's say that what can I do? Let's say that I go to the form, and this composition ref name, I will call it composition, position, and I will convert it into a select field. There we go, right? And I will say, you know what? Whenever you need to fill in that field, instead of trying to figure out what should be done, I will give you all the options. So let's say that you can, there we go, you can create a database in AWS, let's say Azure, and let's add Google so that nobody gets jealous over there, right? So we can now tweak the outcomes of that discovery that I mentioned before, right? Let me do one more just for the sake of making it right. Just that I don't see what it says here. Paul, can you make this bigger? Here, let's say size, right? I don't want people to see this. I would like them to have a size of the database also be a list. Where is the list? Select. And I want them to be able to specify small database, medium database, and let's say large database, right? And that should be it, but it's not. There is only one more thing missing until we are fully operational with everything that the portal, right, the console should do. And that's that I should go and tell those guys how to where to send the information, right? Because port you will see soon, will generate forms automatically, do everything it needs to do. But ultimately, I probably want to trigger some GitHub actions or something like that. And I will do that in this organization, DevOps Paradox. Repository is called port CRDs demo. And the pipeline I want to run is called GitHub YAML, right? So this is, I think I'm done now. Actually, maybe not fully done. Let's say that I want to modify also the update action. What happens when we update things? And the process is the same. This is my organization. This is my repository. And this is the file that represents GitHub actions in this case, which is github.yaml. There we go, right? And I'm finished. It took me like 5 minutes, assuming that I have the backends and the API ready to expose 3 different services to developers, how to create applications, how to create clusters, how to create claims. And now imagine that I'm not an ops person. I'm not Viktor anymore. I'm a developer, right? And let's say that, hey, I would like database, right? And instead of sending email to Joe or whomever is database expert and so on and so forth, I can just come here and say, okay, this is the form that I fill, right? I can select where I want to run a database, let's say in AWS. Oh, that's wrong. I see now that I made a mistake. I will correct that right away. right way. User form. Where are you? This is what happens when you do live demos. Something always goes wrong, but I will correct it eventually, I promise. User form. There we go. Composition. Where is there we go, right? I made a tiny mistake here. See, I put 2 dashes. Should be 1 dash. Azure Postgres. Okay, cool. This should work now. That was a typo. Anyways, going back. So, okay, so I want to create a database. Excellent. Here is, I want to run it in AWS. I'm going to call it silly demo. And I'm going to give it the claim name, also silly demo. The namespace, where should this database run? I don't know, let's say 18, right? That's my namespace. I should probably connect this to be auto-generated as well. Small sounds good. And parameters, let's say 16.2. I want Postgres 16.2, and that's it. I'm done, right? I'm a developer. I'm done with everything I need to do to create a database. And you will see soon also how to manage. It will eventually appear here, but we'll get to that, right? And before we get to that, let me explain what really happened in those few minutes that I was rambling, right? What really happened is that before this demo, I had 4 things set up, right? I had my Kubernetes cluster that runs Crossplane. I will not have time to go into Crossplane, but think of Crossplane as a way how to extend Kubernetes API with additional endpoints like those 3 that you saw, right? I have port, web UI for developer platform, so it's a console part of the platform. This all together is the platform, right? GitHub and Argo CD. So port went to Kubernetes and discovered everything that I can do in that cluster, limited to whatever I decided, right? Crossplane, on the other hand, created those extensions. It extended that API with those 3 different new endpoints, right? Custom resource definitions. And this is me. This is a developer, right? From there on, I interact with port and I say, I want this. I want to create this, or I want to update that, and I want to delete that, right? And port, on the other hand, they does 2 things in this context as well, right? First thing is to discover what can be done and what is the schema of that something, what are all the fields, and so on and so forth. The second thing it does is that whenever somebody submits something to a form, it sends a request to GitHub and says, I don't know what to do with this, right? They're not my problem anymore. I enable people to fill in this form, and now I'm giving it to you, right? And behind that GitHub request is GitHub Actions, as you can guess. And GitHub Actions created a manifest, a simple YAML file, and it stored it in a repository. And then Argo CD, which at the same time is watching that repository. Each part of the puzzle here is oblivious of the existence of anybody else. They're all completely isolated. Argo CD has no idea that there is port, that there is Kubernetes, that there is, sorry, it knows that there is Kubernetes, that there is Crossplane. What it does know is that I'm watching this GitHub repository, and I'm watching and watching and watching, and then all of a sudden, this file appeared over there. What should I do with this file? I should send it to a Kubernetes cluster, right? I will create a custom resource, what we call in Kubernetes, or in case of Crossplane, we call it claims, right? And then Crossplane, on the other hand, knows how to interpret that very simple definition and to do something with it. And that something is, hey, I'm going to create an RDS database in AWS, and I'm going to create some VPCs and some users, and I'm going to create some schema, and I'm going to create some secret with authentication. I'm going to do whatever needs to be done to convert this user-defined manifest into some real resources, right? And then, you haven't seen that part yet, assuming that my demo works. Port is also watching that same Kubernetes cluster and waiting to find out if there is some information that it can present to us, right? Now, if I'm not mistaken, and I might be, probably, port should display here. Let's see. Not yet. It wasn't deployed yet. Let me see. Let me go to my terminal and see whether actually it worked. Maybe it didn't. Actually, even better. I know that many of you are not freaks like me who dislike terminals. So let's take a look at Argo CD and whether this was deployed. There we go. This is what Argo CD discovered, right? In that repository, it created that resource, that single resource, and then Crossplane expanded it into everything needed to run a database, whatever that something is. And now, if I go back to, let's go terminal, right? Let me show you what's happening really behind the scenes, because from a developer perspective, we are done, almost done. But from the administrator perspective, you need to know a couple of things. First of all, I mentioned CRDs, right? Those are all the custom resources that that we can use in this cluster, right? Port could discover any of those, but that might be too much. So I limited it and told Port, hey, discover only those 6 here, right? And that's what it discovered. That's what you saw on the screen. That's what I filled in as a form, right? And the way how it can do it is the same way how we can do it with kubectl, right? It just said, hey, give me the schema. Explain to me what is this thing? What are all the fields? What are all the parameters? What are all the types of the fields and so on and so forth, right? Now, that's the Kubernetes part of the story. That's the Crossplane part that acts as a control plane. Then we have GitHub Actions, right? This is very simple. Actually, as simple as it can get. Apart from retrieve, so Port is sending me the payload that I'm converting into YAML. I'm getting some information from that YAML and just pushing it to either pushing it to a repository or deleting it from repository, depending on whether operation is delete or something else. This is all I do, right? There is nothing else. Just get the information from the payload, from that form, use whichever information you need, generate the file, push it to Git, you're done. And approve that that's what's happening. If I pull, you will see that this file was just created, right? This is what was generated by that form, right? Those are the fields. I said small database, I said 16.2. I said that I want AWS PostgreSQL. There you go, right? And what else? Argo CD, you already saw. Crossplane converted those 10, 20 lines of YAML into everything that we need, right? Not everything, like database is still being created, right? But most of the stuff required to run a database is already there running and so on and so forth. And now, if you're lucky, let's see whether it worked, whether I can see it here. No, I cannot see it. Now I will do something that every good engineer knows to be a very important to do. This is the most important lesson thing here, right? Whenever you don't know why something is not working, you delete it and Kubernetes will create it again, and then maybe it will work, right? Turn it off and on again. That always works. There we go. Let's see whether now it's here. There we go. I knew it. We just need to turn it off and on again, right? And then it works automatically. Here we go. It detected that we created something, that we pushed something to Git. Argo CD synchronized it to the cluster. Crossplane expanded it to create all AWS resources and all Kubernetes resources, whatnot. And then the feedback loop went back to Port and said, here is all the data that I gathered about that, right? This is when it was updated. This is the name of the composition and so on and so forth, right? All the fields, you don't see it well because of my horrible resolution or the monitor, but all the information is here available, right? In other words, I, as a developer, I said here, hey, come, I want to create this thing, wait a minute or two, and then automatically that thing appear here. I'm completely oblivious of what else is happening in a cluster. And then I can continue operating. I can say, okay, so you know that silly demo, I changed my mind. I don't want it to be small. I'm going to be brave. I want to be medium, right? And then the process repeats itself, right? This port is sending it to Git. Git is executing GitHub Actions, creating a file, pushing it to the repository. Argo CD detects that something, puts it to Kubernetes. Crossplane converts that claim into all the changes that need to be performed something, and the feedback loop goes back to port. And if we have enough time, and I think that I'm at the end of my time, eventually after a couple of minutes, you would see the size here changing from small to medium, right? It would be fed back to port and so on and so forth. Since I'm cheap, the last thing I'm going to do today is delete it, right? And then that's the whole process, right? And it looks complicated. First of all, for a developer, it's very, very easy, right? I just need to go there, fill in some fields. Maybe I use WebUI, maybe I use something else, and wait for a couple of minutes, and I get feedback of what is happening with that something. And the rest is basically magic happening behind the scenes. It's what the service providers, I mean, I say service provider in this context, I don't mean AWS, I mean you, as a person who is an expert in database or expert in applications in Kubernetes, or whatever you're expert, you're creating those services and you're exposing them through API by creating APIs, and you're letting port detect those APIs and generate the forms automatically. That's me. That's my, I'm out of time. Maybe I'm not out of time. I don't know. I don't know how much time I have.
Thank you, Viktor, for this automagical presentation. We have two similar questions from
Yes.
two friends of Port. One is Costas, which we all know, and the other is actually Matar from Port. And the question is, both questions are really, what do you think Portal should provide out of the box as the next thing? So what is your next feature request? Kind of referring to your last video.
Oh, first you need to fix a couple of things I already mentioned in that video that is related to this feature. I'm joking. This is you. So this is awesome. What is the next thing? I'm not sure. I didn't think that far.
You didn't think that far.
No, not yet.
So we'll need to get back to Costas and Matar with this answer at another time. Thank you very much. And we will go on a very short break and join our next session. Thank you, Viktor.
Thank you.